It's 2025, a new year and the best time to turn your great idea into a business. Shopify is how you're going to make it happen. Let me tell you how. Shopify makes it simple to create your brand, open for business, and get your first sale. Get your store up and running easily with thousands of customizable templates. All you need to do is drag and drop. Their powerful social media tools let you connect all your channels and create shoppable posts. Established in 2025. Has a nice ring to it, doesn't it? Sign up for your $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/promo. All lowercase. Go to shopify.com/promo to start selling with Shopify today. Shopify.com/promo.
This episode of The Price of Football is supported by International Sports Convention 2025, which is taking place on March the 19th and 20th at the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium. More than 1,000 delegates and 100 speakers will be attending the event, and they will be covering a huge range of topics, from sponsorship and fan engagement to governance and integrity. Founded in 2009, International Sports Convention is the meeting place for the business of sport and has been for the last 16 years.
And there's a special treat for those lucky enough to attend the 2025 edition. The two of us will also be appearing. We'll be having a chat about football finance and governance in front of a live audience. You can book your place now at a special early offer price by going to internationalsportsconvention.com. But don't delay, that special early offer price is only available until the 20th of February.
Book your place now for International Sports Convention 2025 at Spurs Stadium on the 19th and 20th of March by going to internationalsportsconvention.com, and hopefully we'll see you there.
Average is not invited. Not if you're holding your company off-site in Las Vegas. We aren't on friendly terms with the bare minimum, and unenthusiastic is uninvited. Las Vegas's creative energy and world-class hospitality want to bring your company off-site to crazy new heights. That's why fear-based leadership is afraid of Vegas, and boring won't be there, but it will be watching the meeting recordings later. Plan for the extraordinary at vegasmeansbusiness.com.
Hello and welcome to The Price of Football, the show that looks at the money behind the beautiful game with me, Kevin Day, and Liverpool University's Kieran Maguire. Kieran, as you'll notice, a little bit bummed up. I feel like, luckily, I'm a real man and I'm fighting it off. But I feel like if I let it go, I would have a cold, Kieran. But I'm not going to let that happen. So, luckily, been a bit under the weather. It's a good job we didn't have a really important interview to record this morning. Plus, the podcast. I should be in bed, Kieran, but
You're a
comedian. We are. Well, I'm used to it being, a comedian. We are the fourth emergency service, so I understand we have to. And we do have an interview today, Kieran. This is why we're here. So I've gathered you all together today, ladies and gentlemen, for an interview. It's arguably the biggest interview we've done for a long time, Kieran. It's a double header. It's an interview with Paul Barber, the CEO of a club called Brighton and Hove Albion, I believe, to give them their full name, or as they're called in my house over the weekend, Brighton and Hove Albion. That's handball, for the love of God. How's that goal been allowed to stand? And also Clare Sumner, who's the Chief Policy and Social Impact Officer at the Premier League. And this is part of our... you can call it our regulator fortnight, Kieran, because we're talking to finals of the Football Supporters Association the week after next, and in just a couple of times we're talking to Lisa Nandy, the Minister for Sport, about the regulator. But we're nothing if not fair on this podcast, Kieran, so we thought it was only right that we put both sides of the argument. In particular, when we got a message out of the blue saying, would you like to talk to Paul Barber and Clare Sumner? Yes, we would. So this was our very grown-up discussion about the Independent Regulator. Clare, Paul, thank you so much for joining us today. It's very kind of you. Perhaps we could start by introducing yourselves for our listeners. That would be lovely. Clare, can I ask you to do that first?
Hi, first of all, thank you for having me. I'm Clare Sumner. I'm the Chief Policy and Social Impact Officer for the Premier League. I joined because of the social impact part of my title. I'm passionate about the fact that football can give opportunity and inspiration to young people. And I also cover, which I think will be our main topic of debate, the football regulation bill, and obviously other things as well connected to football.
Well, I also know you, or know of you, I should say. This is the first time we met, but I know of you because I'm a trustee of Palace for Life, our foundation. So obviously we have some common ground there which may come up. Paul, can I ask you to introduce yourself for the benefits of our listeners?
Yes, morning, Kevin. Thank you for having me on. I'm Paul Barber. I'm Chief Executive and Deputy Chairman of Brighton Hove Albion. I've been in this job for the last 13 years, and this is my 27th year working in professional football.
I was very unprofessional there, Paul. I tried not to twitch when you mentioned the club that you were running there. I don't know if Kieran, I had a very interesting, we did a benefit in Brighton just before Christmas for the Samaritans in an audience of me, the producer who was a Palace fan, and 200 Brighton fans. What a lovely 2.5 hours I spent hearing all about your adventures in Europe and how well run a club you are. Lovely. We are here, Claire, to talk mainly about the regulator. And it's only fair to say that on the pod we are big supporters of an independent regulator. But before you share some of your misgivings, do you think it will definitely happen, as it still has to battle its way through the House of Lords and then back through the Commons? Are you confident that there will be an independent regulator within football in the course of the next year or so?
Yes, absolutely. I think most people expect the regulator to be up and running in the middle of the year. And just to be very clear, there are some elements of this independent regulation that we support and that we think will be effective. So, for example, some of the things you've discussed around strengthening fan engagement, protecting club heritage, preventing breakaway leagues, which I think is one of the reasons we're here today, are all very important issues. And I think an independent regulator and the way that that's set up in the bill will work really, really well. So yes, I think we're preparing for the independent regulator. There's a shadow regulator in place. He's called Martin Henderson, and he's out there talking to everybody at the moment.
Briefly, before we get into detail, what are your major concerns about the bill, though, Claire?
So I think as ever, and the government have been talking about this a lot, you need to have good regulation. So many of us, I'm a wild swimmer. If you think about the regulation around water and sewage, I think most people would say that's not been incredibly effective. If you think about energy prices, for example. And the government, I think, has pointed out that if regulators get this wrong, more generally, they become blockers. That's not my language. That's Keir Starmer, right? So I think all that we are suggesting is that the financial regulation and redistributions, which I'm sure we'll come on to, need to be improved. So I think we've been misrepresented in a way, to your first question. We're not saying, there should be no regulator. What we are saying, and I think is really important, is there should be an effective regulator. And within that framework, it should be pro-growth and support the incredible success that is football in this country.
We'll come back to the idea of it being pro-growth later, Paul, because it seems to me that the government outline of the bill is very specific in that it doesn't intend to block growth. But Paul, as the CEO of an annoyingly successful Premier League club, what are your specific misgivings?
Well, I think the first one is uncertainty. I think with any kind of new regulatory process in any industry, uncertainty creates a lack of confidence. A lack of confidence can prevent investment. It can actually stymie growth, which is why we're very keen and very clear that we want as much uncertainty cleared up as quickly as possible. I think we don't want any disincentives to new owners coming into football. We don't want any disincentives to existing owners continuing to invest in the game. We're concerned about the cost. We're significantly concerned about where those costs are going to be met from, and what that might do to other plans that we have. So I think all round, we need a lot more engagement. We've had some consultation, not enough. We're concerned about when the engagement has happened, how much we've been listened to, and how many changes have been made as a result of that consultation. And in many cases, I think the narrative that's been portrayed, as Claire said, that the Premier League and the Premier League clubs are anti-regulator is actually quite misleading. There are many things within the bill and within the regulator's remit that we will support, and we do support. We're very much about clubs having their heritage protected. We're very much about better and continued fan engagement. We want better owners. We don't want breakaway leagues. All these things are good things that the regulator can help support. But there are also a lot of other things that are a long way from the genesis of the regulator, the fan-led review, that seem to be taking clubs into added cost, added bureaucracy, duplication of effort, duplication of time. And those things are concerning to us.
I want to bring Kieran in a moment about the actual costs of the regulator. But I'm also... The word misleading is a word that a lot of people use. As a fan, there are quite a few high-profile journalists who are clearly, whether they're mouthpieces of football CEOs or club owners, I don't know, but they seem to be deliberately misleading people as to what the bill is meant to do. And this idea of a disincentive is one of those. There's nothing within the outline of the bill that I can see that acts as a disincentive. And Brentford's chair wrote last week that a regulator must not be allowed to hold back clubs that dare to dream. I don't see anything in there that does it. Why do you think that clubs that are optimistic or ambitious are being held back?
It's really interesting, I think, that the devil is in the detail of the legislation. And forgive me on that, because I think fans want to be reassured that this regulator is going to work in the best interests of football, as well as around strengthened engagement. And the problem with the system at the moment is it sets out a model of 1 to 116 clubs. It will treat all of those clubs in the same way, and potentially in the Premier League. And I do use the word potentially because I think what we're identifying here are risks. By their nature, regulators are very risk averse. And so potentially under the bill, the rules, what's known as direct licensing conditions on clubs could mean that your club could end up having various debt and capital and liquidity buffers that could be different per club in the Premier League, different in the EFL. And what that will affect is the balance of competition on the pitch. And that's what we're really concerned about, because as you know from your, I don't want to make you feel bad, but obviously you can see that some of the games we're having, anybody can win. And that's really, really exciting. And the reason for that is the way that the Premier League calibrates itself. And we spend a lot of time on our rules and regulation. And I think one of our concerns is that the regulator will come over the top of that, will have to be really risk averse, and therefore end up potentially putting things in place, not just for our league, by the way, but for all leagues that don't make much sense. And also don't enable the regulator to go where I think we're all agreed. We want the regulator to get into problem clubs or where there are bad owners. And at the moment, the current model makes it really hard to work out how on earth they're going to do that.
Well, you mentioned fans, Claire. I was going to, if you pardon me for a moment, Paul, I want to follow this point up with Claire. As I was going to talk about fans later, I don't know how much the Premier League has done in terms of consulting with fans. I don't know how much individual Premier League clubs have done with consulting with fans in the way that the Tracy Crouch fan-led review have done, in the way that the Football Supporters Association have done. Because I have to say, most football fans I speak to don't share those concerns about the regulator. Most football fans I know are very keen for a regulator to come in. Admittedly, a lot of that is to do with the heritage aspect, with saving nicknames, badges, and so on. But it's also to do with the fact that most football fans feel they are completely alienated from the financial process now. So I don't get any sense for football fans that I speak to, and admittedly, this is apocryphal information. This is not the result of a long-standing survey that I've done. It's talking to people in pubs. But the sense that I get is that fans are very much in favour of the independent regulator and in favour of anything that will stop speculative investment in their club. And in particular, the big fear at the moment is American owners. And most football fans think that the regulator will be a barrier to that.
I think if you're perhaps a Liverpool fan at the moment, you might disagree with that premise. But I also think that what's really important here is that fans, you're right, and I speak to Kevin Miles regularly. We have a structured dialogue with the FSA regularly. And also in my role, we're responsible for something called the fan engagement standard. And I think you're right that fans do support an independent regulator, particularly around being consulted properly by their clubs and particularly around heritage. I think that's absolutely right. I think what hasn't been discussed openly enough is the potential effect of this regulator and the model that's being proposed. And it means that the regulator won't work effectively within the regulations that we already have. I mean, the Premier League isn't just regulated by the Premier League, it's regulated by UEFA, as you know. Manchester United is on the New York Stock Exchange. And so the question we're asking is, how can this come together in the government's own construct of an effective regulator that won't be risk averse, won't duplicate, and will come in to solve the problems, right? Because I think the other thing that fans are acutely aware of, so for example, Reading fans or others, they're acutely aware of some very specific things that have happened within their own clubs. And we totally get and respect that. And we're not pushing against it. But we're saying if this model is going to target those areas, then actually it needs to work with well-run clubs and well-run leagues to ensure that it's actually not a sledgehammer to crack a nut.
Yeah. Paul, I'll come back to you in a moment, if you don't mind. But I'd like to ask Kieran here about your concern about costs, because we spoke to Mark Ives at the National League recently, Kieran, and it's a concern he shared. So throughout the league, it seems everyone is concerned about how the costs of an independent regulator would be shared. In your analysis, how much will a regulator cost on an annual basis, and who will be paying that cost?
Well, I think the stated budget is somewhere in the region of £10 to £12 million a year. Will that be higher? We'll have to wait and see. I'm not convinced myself. And I share the reservations of, you don't want money leaking out of football. If we take a look at the Premier League's own wage bill, that's trebled over the course of the last decade. So, there's cost control there. If we take a look at the Premier League's the legal bill, you've got civil war effectively operating within the Premier League now between some of the individual clubs, and also, it has to be said, between the Premier League and the EFL. I think if those issues had been sorted, and especially when it comes to a financial deal, which does create uncertainty, then I'm not in favour of the regulator. I'll be perfectly honest. I think it's necessary because of failure of leadership from the Football Association, which is supposed to be the governing body of the ground. Poor governance, a rule book which, frankly, if I can come up with a dozen schemes that can circumvent financial fair play, and I'm just a teacher, then we have seen clubs doing it on a regular basis. So I think the costs are a concern. Mission creep, I share the reservations there. But if the Premier League and the EFL had managed to sort out a deal, if an offer had been put on the table over the course of the last 3 years when the regulator was first proposed, I think it would significantly diminish the need for the regulator to get involved in the financial position. And to a certain extent, it's of its own making. Get round a table, sort out a deal. The EFL's not going to get 25%, and they don't deserve 25%. I think Steve Parish has said that a bit more from a bigger cake is acceptable, but it's just never arrived. So I'm not, as a finance person, I work in Canary Wharf all the time. I work in Wall Street teaching. And that's a highly regulated industry, which is very successful. So I agree, get the regulation right and it encourages investment. Get it wrong and you don't. I'm not convinced there's anything wrong, though.
This is a paid advertisement for Shopify. I feel like I'm missing out because it seems like everyone is either starting a side hustle or becoming their own boss. And you know what they're hearing a lot? It's the sound of another sale on Shopify, the all-in-one commerce platform to start, run, and grow your business.
Shopify is the commercial platform revolutionizing millions of businesses worldwide. Whether you're selling bespoke doggy treats or even yeast extract and cheese-related bakery products, Shopify simplifies selling online and in person, so you can successfully grow your business. Covering all your sales channels, from a shop-ready POS system to its all-in-one e-commerce platform, Shopify even gets you selling across social media marketplaces like Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok. Full of the industry-leading tools ready to ignite your growth, Shopify gives you complete control over your business and your brand without learning new skills in design or coding. And thanks to award-winning help and with an extensive business course library, Shopify is ready to support your success every step of the way.
Sign up for a £1 per month trial period at shopify.co.uk/priceoffootball, all lowercase. So go to shopify.co.uk/priceoffootball to take your business to the next level today. That's shopify.co.uk/priceoffootball.
Would you wear the same shoes for every occasion? Or rock the same outfit 7 days a week? Of course not. Your style is better with options. Your investments could be too. SIBO Index options give you access to various contract sizes, global trading hours, and potential tax advantages. That's a good look for any portfolio. If you're ready to invest in style, head to betterwithoptions.com. There are risks associated with SIBO company products. Review the disclosures and disclaimers at sibo.com/US_disclaimers.
Kieran, first of all, you're not just a teacher, but Paul, I would like to bring you in on what Kieran said there, because it was going to be my next question. One of the big fears of the Premier League seems to be that you will be forced to change the way finances are distributed throughout the pyramid. But as Kieran said, you've had 3 years since the fan-led review already to negotiate your own deal, and that simply hasn't happened. And as Trevor Birch has said to us, the attitude he seems to come up against from a lot of Premier League clubs is that the EFL have nothing to negotiate with. So this is something that fans, not just the Premier League clubs, but of course outside the rest of the pyramid, this is something they're very concerned with, and it plays into the suspicions of those fans who 100% definitely want a regulator, like I do.
Well, I think first of all, there's two sides to every story. There's got to be an incentive for both sides to want to do a deal, and I think the threat of a regulator and a backstop power is a significant one and a significant disincentive to a deal getting done. So that's the first point. I think the second point, Kevin, we need to go back to something you said earlier about what the fans want. I spoke to some fans just before our game on Saturday. Their perception is that the regulator is going to fix ticket prices. It isn't. That it's going to control kickoff times. It isn't. That it's going to stop clubs going into administration and bail them out if they do. It isn't. So I think there's a lot of perception from fans about what the regulator is going to do and isn't going to do that is quite a long way from what it's actually going to do. And I think we've moved a long way from the genesis of the fan-led review. Let's talk about that for a second. The fan-led review, for me, should have involved talking to clubs that had been through some of the things that the bill is designed to stop: administration, liquidation, loss of ground, bad owners, a community losing its club. You're talking to one now, a club that's been through all of that and a lot more. Were we consulted in that fan-led review? Absolutely not. Did we try and engage in the process? Absolutely, several times. That suggests to me that there was a narrative that was predetermined from the fan-led review that actually had an outcome that was desired. Our story didn't fit that narrative, didn't fit the outcome that was desired, and therefore Brighton's story was ignored. That should concern every football fan, because if there's one club in the country, regardless of who you support and where your colours are pinned to the mast, whose story should have been heard, it should have been Brighton's. And yet it wasn't. Why is that? Why was that the case? And why has it been so hard to engage since? It's very hard not to be cynical when a very, very good case study in a club that was actually saved by its fans, supported by its community, has gone from the bottom of what it was effectively League Two to play in Europe, and its story hasn't been heard. That should concern every football fan in the country.
I mean, if I may just jump in, and Kieran, you raised so many different points. I don't think I can take them on, and I'm sure we'll unpack them a bit. But one of the things I think is really interesting is just whether we think English football is successful or not, right? So as a fan, for example, there are 15 million coming into our stadia. There are 35 million watching the Premier League. We are one of the most successful and most loved football competitions around the world. Then you look at the EFL Championship. It's the sixth wealthiest, as you know. They've just spent quite a lot of money in the transfer window. They've just secured some new broadcasting deals worth around £1 billion. Now, if their competition was deeply dull, I don't think that would have happened. And I think one of the things we've got to be careful of, and again, this country sometimes, my previous life was in the BBC. We're very good at talking down things and actually saying whether things are successful or not. Yes, we've got some problem clubs within the pyramid, and those should be addressed. But actually, when you look at since the Tracy Crouch review was done, no administrations. You look during COVID, which was a dreadful time economically for everybody, no administrations. You look actually at the last 12 years, 6 administrations, and you go back to 1945, which is the test that most FTSE companies would use, 7 liquidations. Now, nobody wants the upset in a community of what happens. And we were talking earlier, I'm from Bedford. There's some exciting things happening in Bedford at the moment. Obviously, my local team, Luton, got relegated last year. We all feel passionately about our football. We all love watching our football. And I actually think that not only is football in this country inspirational, it brings together people. It has huge community impact, both on the pitch and off the pitch. And I think we should just get realistic about some of the numbers. And Kieran, I've heard you're one of the experts on the numbers, but it depends on how you tell both the story, the data you use to support it, and actually the reality of what's happening, which is the Premier League is, delivering great football. We have a duty to support the rest of the pyramid, which we do. So to the deal point, there is a current deal in place. Sometimes we talk about this as if there's no deal. There is a current deal in place which has a mutual termination of 3 years. There's been solidarity payments since 2007. And I think the Premier League takes its responsibilities really, really seriously. And I oversee some of that community investment. That's a cumulative total of 1.6 billion over 3 years in our broadcast cycle. We've got one of the richest and deepest pyramids in the world. We have some of the best community efforts in the world. And I think when you regulate something that's so successful, and it goes to your point about growth, you've got to be really, really careful. Why would we want to damage this success? Why would we want to damage this great national story? And I don't think that's in the interest of fans. And I don't think that's what they want.
Let me take you back to the Brighton story, Paul. A story I'm all too aware of because, as Kieran keeps reminding me, I did the first benefit to raise money to survey the Falmer site, which I didn't think that through. The first time you played in Europe, I regretted that decision immediately. But I'm interested where you talk about the idea that a backstop, a regulator, is actually a disincentive to the negotiations with the EFL about distribution of broadcasting money. How is a regulator a disincentive to that?
Well, I think if you feel that the regulator is more likely to support your argument for a better deal than actually reaching an agreement with the Premier League before a backstop power is invoked, then there's a disincentive. And, the regulator at the moment, as we understand it, has effectively a binary power. They have a choice between accepting a Premier League argument or an EFL argument. If the EFL argument is closer aligned to the regulator's remit, the chances are that that's the decision the regulator will make. There's no ability for the regulator to mediate. There's no ability for the regulator to sort of take the best bits of one argument and the best bits of the other. They've got to choose one argument or the other. It's a binary power. That actually, if you are sitting in a position where you feel that distribution across the pyramid should be greater, and you think the regulator is aligned to that thinking, and let's be clear that the regulator's there to promote financial sustainability and systemic resilience, there's a fair chance that you're going to think the regulator is going to be on your side. Therefore, if you're being offered less in a negotiation, then you're more likely to say, I tell you what, let's throw the dice, let's see what the regulator says. That actually stops the deal getting done.
Kieran, you're at the heart of the independent fan-led review. Does it strike you that it's binary? Because it strikes me in all my reading and research that the regulator is there to encourage both sides to come up with an agreement that they're both happy with, not to decide that one is right and one is wrong.
My understanding is that in the initial thoughts of how the regulator was being integrated, what we call game theory would be applied, whereby if you have two people in a discussion, you take the best of the two arguments. From what I understand, when I talk to people at Whitehall, that that is no longer there. I absolutely understand Paul's position. If he's saying that there are potential bad actors on the other side who are deliberately delaying, I think, yeah, I can understand that perspective. When I speak to people in the EFL at clubs, they don't want to wait 2 or 3 years for another potential deal to be agreed, which might even not necessarily be in their best interest. They would rather a deal be sorted today. I think they are quite realistic in their ambitions and aspirations. A slightly bigger slice of the pie, and the pie is growing, could be to the benefit of all. At the same time, there needs to be checks and balances in how that money is spent. Because, Claire, you gave that figure of £1.6 billion. Well, that includes parachute payments.
Yes, it does. Yeah. And
parachute payments, by my calculations, are up to around about 750, 800 million pounds of that total. So, I think that's another area which I understand the concerns of the Premier League, and I've advocated from day one. And I'm not saying go and buy my book, but I wrote a book 5 years ago which put out the business case. I come from an insolvency background, so I know the implications for uncertainty in business. I've been 100% behind parachute payments from day one. And when Rick Parry describes them as an evil which has to be eradicated, I'm completely opposed to that. So I can understand the reservations of your position. I just think that from an optics point of view, if the Premier League had put a deal to the EFL over the course of the last 3 years and it was rejected, and you said, well, look, we're offering more money, and they've turned it down, I think that's a lost opportunity for the Premier League.
But Kieran, there's a couple of points there. First of all, it does include parachute payments, but it doesn't include an average of £200 million a year in net transfer flow from Premier League to Championship clubs. That's, I think, a really important point. It's further revenue the Championship clubs are benefiting from. I think the other point there is, in terms of the overall pie, we totally understand that we have a responsibility at the top of the game to support the rest of the game. It's a privileged position we're in. Most of us in the Premier League are transient members of the Premier League. We're going to be, at some point in our futures, more likely than not to be back in the lower divisions. So therefore, again, the narrative that we look at this from a position of self-interest and privilege only is wrong. Certainly from our club's point of view, we look at this as we could be back in the Championship or worse at some point in the future. So let's try and find a way that works something out that is for the good of the whole game. But we also want to make sure that we're not simply making it even harder for ourselves to compete in the Premier League, even harder for clubs in the even easier rather for clubs in the Championship to replace us in the Premier League, particularly if those that have got even wealthier owners than us, but also understanding where any additional money might be going. Is it only going to Championship clubs? Is the vast majority going to Championship clubs? Is it going to be used on infrastructure to improve the fan experience, to improve training facilities for academy players? Is it going to be invested in women and girls football? Or is it simply going to be spent on player salaries? Because if it's going to be spent just on player salaries, I don't see how that's making the game more financially sustainable. I don't see how that's creating systemic resilience. So if I look at the two primary objectives of the bill, neither of them are being satisfied by those actions. So one of the things we've argued for a long time is, let's have a little bit more clarity about what this additional money is going to be used for. Let's have a little bit more clarity about where it's going to go. Let's have a plan for actually making the whole pyramid more sustainable with better infrastructure and better facilities and more growth in the women and girls side. But we've heard none of that. We've had actually none of that at all. Nothing has been given to us that satisfies us that those objectives would be met, that those fears could be aligned or allayed. Unfortunately, it seems like any additional money would be used on player wages, which would make it easier for Championship clubs to replace Premier League clubs. And so the cycle goes on.
Yeah, and I think that's what's been really interesting here is that on one level, to your point earlier, Kieran, because I think it's important for everybody to understand, it is actually at the moment, in the way that the bill works, choose envelope A or choose envelope B. And so actually that's a little bit like a game show, isn't it? Take your pick here. And actually increasingly what we've become concerned about is, since the government added in parachutes to the current bill, the revenue scope has increased, and the potential to get involved in something which, as you know, drives the success of the Premier League competition, because it enables newly promoted clubs and well-established clubs to know and manage how that actually could work if they had the shock of relegation or they have the pressure of then trying to spend on wages. It's really, really critical. And I don't think anybody likes the kind of game theory of, is it going to be envelope A or envelope B? And even Tracy Crouch, when the bill was being looked at some time ago under the previous government, said in terms, it's a little bit like Russian roulette, and neither side can be quite certain about what's going to happen. And because of that, that has a chilling effect on investors, to come to the point about the real concerns. And then the other thing that this government has done is that they've created a sort of regulatory cycle of doom, where every 5 years this could potentially be reopened, which doesn't bring the parties together, doesn't enable people to perhaps contract for the longer term. And football in the end is about longer term assets. You know, stadia kind of accrue over years. Training of young people accrues over years. So we're actually ending up with something that's very, very uncertain, very, very novel in legal terms. And also, I think has had, because I think if it had had the incentive of bringing the parties together, you know, for whatever on both sides, that would have happened by now. And it hasn't. But that's also in part because there is a deal in place. So there isn't this cliff edge. The Premier League has not created a cliff edge. And actually, we continue to fund in good faith. And actually, since 2007, the numbers have only gone up.
Well, Claire, to outsiders, it does seem there is a cliff edge. I mean, certainly compared to Scotland, for example, where there's a gentle slope rather than a precipice, because you both talk about the success of the Premier League, and the success of the Premier League is part of the problem, in that so many clubs in the Championship and increasingly at the top end of League One think that the only way to resolve their financial problems is to get into the Premier League, because they think it's a license to print money. So therefore, they increase their financial problems in an attempt to get into the Premier League, because there is too much of a gap. The Premier League earns far more money than the rest of football. So the incentive for those clubs to not be sensible when it comes to financial investment is quite clear, isn't it?
Well, I think, you know, Paul's had the lived experience of Brighton, so we can hear his take on that. I mean, actually, I think that overall, you think about 51 clubs having been in the Premier League since it started would actually evidence it the other way. And actually, one of the things that's exciting in the Premier League compared to some of the other European leagues is the tightness of that top competition. I think recently, you know, we haven't known to the last couple of weeks who's actually going to win. Then you've got the places for Europe. And then, of course, you've got the fight for relegation. And then within the Championship, you've also got a really exciting competition for the playoffs and then going through. So I think the evidence, again, is slightly different to that. And then I think in terms of the overinflation potentially by some clubs, then that comes down to the points that Paul is making, which is, what is the financial regulation there? How does it help ensure that it's sustainable, but also gets the right competitive balance? And that's something that takes years to get right. We're keeping improving in the Premier League. We're keeping reflecting on that. But it's genuinely very, very hard to get right. But Paul's got the lived experience, which I haven't.
Kevin, for the first time in 35 minutes, I can agree with you on something. I mean, it is a very difficult balancing act between the Premier League and the Championship when it comes to budgets and investment. And obviously, having made that transition in the last decade ourselves, we had to spend a lot of money to get out of the Championship. And we did it within the rules, and we did it sustainably because we've got a good owner that's prepared to back the club and is wealthy enough to do so. That's true. Getting into the Premier League, however, you've then got a choice. You either have to invest in order to compete, or you gamble, don't invest, and therefore try and actually sort of shore up your defences by taking the money and hope for the best. Almost invariably, that ends in relegation. So you have to invest, but in order to invest, you need the confidence of the parachute payments. In my recent meetings with the ministers, they were kind enough to say that there was no plan to abolish parachute payments. That's a big tick. That's a reassurance. But what they didn't say was there wasn't a plan to reduce them. And they didn't say either that there was a plan not to reduce them within, say, a 12-month period. So, for example, we could get 12-month notice that parachute payments could be reduced. Well, that actually rocks the confidence of clubs from investing in players to stay in the Premier League. We've got to commit to 3, 4, 5-year contracts. if there's a chance that parachute payments during that period could be reduced, that could actually make Premier League clubs even more financially vulnerable than some of the clubs below them in the Championship, because we're committing to big contracts over long periods of time. We can't deal with the uncertainty that parachute payments could be altered within the term of those contracts. So how can that actually work in practice? And this is one of the points I made right at the start of this interview, where the uncertainty is leading to a lack of investor confidence, because there is no clarity over how some of the things within the bill will actually work in practice. They might look good in theory, they might look good written down, but when you actually sit down and work through real life examples of how the football industry works, how Premier League clubs make their decisions, how Premier League clubs make their investments, then a lot of what's in the bill is simply creating a lack of clarity, a lot of uncertainty, and that invariably and will damage investor confidence. So we have to be really clear about what we intend. But there is no doubt that there is a real challenge for those clubs that are promoted. They've got to make some really difficult choices as to what their strategy is in order to stay in the Premier League. Crystal Palace have made the same choices in the last decade as well.
Kieran, I recognise that slight frown that you gave when Paul mentioned investor confidence. Is this something you'd like to share with us?
Well, I have discussions with investors, rightly or wrongly. The constant issue that they raise with me when it comes to ability to invest is PSR, not the regulator. They see the regulator, and we've just seen. I work in the city of Liverpool, as you know. We've just seen the Everton takeover in recent months. If the investors weren't confident about the future of football, the Friedkin Group would not have committed that amount of money to Everton Football Club, who, it has to be said, at the time were not in a very good position as far as their Premier League status is concerned. Equally, I totally agree with Paul. There has to be clarity. Parachute payments, in my view, have contributed. I mean, Clare raised the issue earlier of fewer clubs going into administration than we saw historically. I think a lot of the reasons for the historic administrations were a set of rules which were really poor, which effectively encouraged clubs to go into administration towards the end of the season, with the debacle with ITV Digital and so on. So the position has improved, and I think we do need clarity. I'm entirely with that, and have discussions. But I go back, a slightly better offer. You could have got probably a 10-year commitment from clubs in the EFL who I can assure you, when I talk to them, and Paul was in this position himself, that the PSR rules in 2013-14 that were proposed were to allow clubs in the EFL Championship to lose no more than £5 million over a 3-year period. And that had to be completely reorganised because of the state of parachute payments in order to allow clubs such as Brighton and so on to be able to have a competitive budget to try to get back into, or try to get into the Premier League in the first place. So I go back to this. It's a mess. And I don't think the regulator is going to solve the mess. It's going to make things slightly better. But from an investor point of view, it's not what I'm hearing at ground level.
I realise we have time constraints on this interview this morning, and I do want to talk to you both about other projects that you have going on, because I want to end without having an argument, because we're very friendly like that. But there are. I don't
have an argument.
No, not at all. But I feel I want to talk to Paul. I'm very aware, Clare and Paul, that I deal with emotion. It's simple as that. That I'm very easily bamboozled when it comes to finances and facts. So I'm very aware that I'm the what about this and this. But it does strike me, Paul, that surely, you mentioned Palace, Brighton, Brentford. Surely a regulator is good for a club of those size, because we know the so-called Big Six, if they were allowed to, in a heartbeat, they would negotiate their own broadcasting deals, they'd negotiate their own streaming deals, and they'd cut you out of it completely, because you know that their attitude is that clubs like Brighton, Palace, Brentford don't contribute as much to the global appeal of football as they do. So surely you'd be in favour of something that's going to absolutely prevent that going to happen. We're not going to be asked to be in the Super League. Surely you'd be in favour of something that's absolutely going to prevent that going to happen.
Well, I don't. Well, absolutely. As we said right at the start, there are certain things within the bill and within potentially the regulator's remit that we absolutely support. I don't think there are 14 or more clubs in the Premier League, Kevin, that are likely to vote for clubs selling their own media rights directly. So again, there are already inbuilt systems within the league and the regulations within the league that protect us from those sorts of things. Breakaway league, we saw what happened from the fans' reaction to the proposal of European Super League. Again, there are protections that are already there. So there are certain things that are already, I think, inherent in our system that are already protected. And of course, we absolutely want other clubs to be able to go on the journey that we've been on. That's one of the reasons we're so nervous about changes to things like parachute payments, because you want clubs to have the incentive to get to the Premier League and then the confidence when they do get there to invest in their teams, to stay there. And there's no guarantee. There's no magic wand that says if you invest this amount of money, you stay in the Premier League. Bigger clubs than Brighton and Crystal Palace have tried that, failed and gone down, and have spent a long time in the lower reaches of the pyramid. But of course, we absolutely want clubs to be able to follow our journey and our story, which is why, going back to the fan-led review, we were so surprised and so disappointed that our story wasn't heard. Because there was no regulator to save Brighton. There was no government intervention to save Brighton at that time, and other clubs that have been through similar experiences. So it's just disappointing that the basis, the genesis for this bill has excluded those sorts of stories. Why weren't, we asked, how did you manage to rally the community, rally the fans? How did you manage to survive without your own stadium for so long, without a training ground? How did your crowds go down to 3,000, 4,000, 5,000 a year and now they're back up to 32, 33? How did you get to Europe and 2 cup semi-finals from the position you were in 27 years ago? That should have been a really informed story that informed where we are with this bill and ultimately the regulator's remit. But it was never heard because it was never asked for. And even when we tried to intervene to say, look, do you want to come and talk to us to find out exactly what happened here? Because it's quite a story. It will inform your bill. It will inform your debate. Complete silence. Ignored. Again, I think that should be of concern to football fans everywhere, that kind of story wasn't listened to form a bill of this type.
And I think, Kieran, speaking to your point, I think at the moment, there's half of this bill that works and I think should deliver a net benefit for fans. There's half of this bill at the moment that doesn't. And I think that's the bit that we really don't have confidence in at the moment. And I think the recent debate in the House of Lords, showed a lack of clarity on the face of legislation. And I think that is concerning. And so when you get to things like the owners and directors test and not being able to be absolutely clear about that, that's a real worry. And I think, one of the great things now is that the government has an opportunity to fix this and get it right so that actually it's a whole bill that will work and be effective, because then that's in the interests of football. So I think what we really would like now is for the government to constructively engage with us to help improve and change the bill. And that's entirely possible. That's part of what legislative scrutiny and public debate should be about. And so, we really welcome this opportunity perhaps to put some of the other sides of the arguments, but also to reassure everybody that, there's part of this bill that we really support, that we really think will work. But when you get into financial regulation and government intervention in a very complex ecosystem for something so successful, we should just take a moment to get it right.
Sorry, Claire, what's not clear about the owners and directors test in the legislation?
So on the floor in the House of Lords, the minister was unable to confirm for sure whether, for example, and again, I appreciate this isn't without controversy, the owners of Newcastle would be, retested or not. And in terms of actual certainty, that's an issue. And then we don't know quite whether other people will be tested or not. And I think in terms of regulatory certainty, from my experience, what's important is to be crystal clear. Opaqueness does nobody any favours on either side. It's not going to help the regulator and it's not going to help the clubs either. And I think that lack of clarity is something that could also be improved.
Love, exciting and new. Hello, Hannah Waddingham here. Have you seen the fabulous new Sun Princess? World-class entertainment, exceptional dining, and the greatest pizza ever. It's a love.
Don't miss our Come Aboard sale with up to 40% off and free room upgrades. Visit princess.com or call your travel advisor to book. Princess Cruises. Terms and restrictions apply. Offer ends 2/28/25. Ships of Bermudan and British Registry.
You know what's smart? Enjoying a fresh gourmet meal at home that you didn't have to cook. Meet Factor, your loophole in the laws of mealtime. Chef-crafted meals delivered with a tap, ready in just 2 minutes. You know what's even smarter? Treating yourself without cheating your goals. Factor is dietitian approved, chef prepared, and you plated. Pretty smart, huh? Refresh your routine and eat smart with Factor. Learn more at factormeals.com.
Paul mentioned history, Claire, and it has to be said that back at the start of the Premier League negotiations, way back in the late 80s, early 90s, the Football League clubs then were rather bullish about their ability to remain strong and independent without the breakaway Premier League. Is there an argument now, though, for bringing all the clubs under the same banner? Would the Premier League consider in any way, shape or form the idea? Yeah, they would probably still have the biggest influence, but would it help English football if all 92 clubs were run under the same administrative regime?
I think at the moment I'm dealing with the problems in front of us around the current bill and how actually the 5 leagues work and the sustainability of the pyramid. I mean, you're then beginning to get into, aren't you, debates that have been had in the past about how best to run and manage football. I note in other countries, you've got slightly different models of this. I mean, I think we believe at the moment passionately that the model is working. As I said earlier, this 20 club competition, which is all about delivering compelling football for fans, which I actually think is what most of us as fans really care about. You know, we want to see our teams compete and play beautiful football. You know, and I've been lucky since joining the Premier League for a year. I've seen some absolutely cracking football. I also watch in lower leagues. My son plays for a team of kids with disabilities. I mean, all over the place, from the grassroots to the very top, the football is compelling and brilliant. And what we're focusing on is ensuring that the Premier League can stay successful so we can sustain the whole of that football pyramid and those experiences.
Paul, just before we talk briefly at the end about 2 projects you're both involved with that I think we can all agree are very, very good and show football at its very best. We're talking to Lisa Nandy later in the week. Do you have a message for her that we could pass on?
Well, I think the recent uptick in consultation engagement is really good, really encouraging. We welcome that. I think the need to listen and act on some of the things we're saying is really important. And as Claire said, you know, right from the start, you know, again, the narrative has been that the Premier League and Premier League clubs are anti-regulation, anti-governance bill. We're not. There are many elements of the bill that we're supportive of. We totally accept and understand that a regulator is coming. We simply want the bill and the regulation to be the best it can be. We want it to actually help football, support football, help sustain football, help grow football, not actually the opposite of that. And in order for that to happen, we feel that some of the consultation and some of the engagement has got to turn into active listening and some change. Because up until now, there's been consultation, not enough in our opinion, but frankly, not enough listening and not enough action on the back of listening. And we're simply looking for that to improve before it's too late. And what we don't want to see happen is the game that we all love and the game that we all have cherished for 150 years or more is damaged because of something that we didn't need to do in the first place in the way that we're doing it. We simply want it to be the best it can be.
Claire, you're social impact lead at the Premier League. Tell us about some of the projects you have going on at the moment.
So we've got some really exciting things going on at the moment under the banner of called More Than a Game. So it's more than 90 minutes on a pitch. And actually, we're celebrating this over these 2 weeks. So thank you for mentioning it. And actually, all over the country, we're appointing 100 community champions. And sometimes these are coaches in some of our programs like Premier League Kicks. They're secondary school teachers. I met a fantastic secondary school teacher in Wolves recently who's actually brought football and brought the Premier League into her school to help kids who may or may not have the opportunities that we would all like our children to have. And I think what we're really focusing on at the moment is working with partners, not just kind of government, with regional mayors like Richard Parker, to try and actually maximise our impact in the community, particularly in deprived areas. And it's not just in the 20 Premier League clubs. We support all across the pyramid. I think around 164 clubs are involved in our programmes. And then we've also been really excited about investing in women's football, 20 million into grassroots women's football, giving girls those opportunities. I went to Brentford with a giant bee, which was a weird experience for me, a kind of massive bee. And we gave awards out to 11-year-old girls who were playing football in Brentford Stadium, having the time of their lives. And I wish as a girl myself that I could have had some of those opportunities. So I think it's really powerful stuff, but it's simple stuff, right? It's just bringing us together in a really amazing way. And then some of our coaches, it's got to be said, many of who train up to be teaching assistants and get qualifications, it's a journey for those guys as well. We employ about 6,000 people on this work, and they are inspirational.
I'm always very happy to tell those people who are critics of the Premier League, of which I am one sometimes, but through my work as a trustee in the Palace for Life, I'm aware of how much not only Premier League clubs are giving to their community and their foundation, but the Premier League itself. The only worry being that sometimes the Premier League's contribution is so generous that has an even more negative impact on those clubs that are relegated. But Paul, to finish,
no, it continues. Just to reassure you,
there is a parachute type payment.
No. I mean, I think it's deeper than that. The Premier League charity funds across the pyramid, so that those Premier League kicks, secondary school, primary school programs, we don't have sort of cliff edges of charitable involvement.
Yeah. Paul, I know you wanted to mention a project that's very close to your heart.
Yes, well, very recently taken up the role of chair of Football Beyond Borders, which is a charity that helps kids in pretty vulnerable situations in vulnerable parts of the country. There's 1 million kids in the UK that don't have a trusted adult relationship, someone that they can turn to when times are tough for them. So Football Beyond Borders uses football as a way to help refocus these kids. They might be from broken homes, they might be involved in gangs, they might be involved in knife crime, a whole range of drug-related issues. And so Football Beyond Borders gets those kids focused again on their schoolwork, hopefully stops them being excluded from school, gets them through their exams, and hopes and gives them a chance to actually build a better future for themselves. So it's something which I'm delighted to be involved in. Delighted that the FA support, along with Nike and Gillette and a number of other big names, and it gives us a chance to get up and down the country to hopefully impact some of these kids that are having a tough time and to get them into a better place for the future.
I have to say, I'm very, very proud of everything that my club does in the community, but the thing I'm most proud of is the Divert programme, which again is just finding a way to access young kids. The power of the badge. There's no point me trying to talk to these young kids because they've got no interest in anything I've got to say. But if I can help fund youngsters from our community to put on a Palace tracksuit and go and get into these communities and help them get out of gangs, get out of knife crime, then I think that's the most brilliant thing we do. And it's just one of a range of many things that the Premier League do. And that's something we can agree on. It's just all been a bit grown up for me, so I'm going to have to go and have a cup of tea and a biscuit. Thank you. Before we record the actual podcast, thank you so much for giving us the time this morning. I'm sure as the bill makes its progress through the House of Commons after the House of Lords, we'll have time to chat again. In the meantime, as I say, thank you so much.
Thanks, Kevin. Thanks, Kieran.
Pleasure. Thanks both. Good to see you.
Kieran, I don't want to rehearse every single bit of the discussion we had, so I think it's probably easier to do that when we talk to Kevin Miles and Lisa Nandy. The discussion about parachute payments, I'm still a little bit confused, good or bad, when we went down that avenue.
Well, I've said from day one that they're good. Their objective was to prevent clubs going into administration following relegation, and that objective's been achieved. I thought it was a good discussion. I listened to what both Paul and Claire had to say, and they do raise some valid points. As our very good friend Nick DeMarco always says, mediation and communication is better than litigation and legislation. And as I as I said, it's an indictment of the failure of the Football Association to act as it should be the same as the Bank of England, as being the sort of the body that brings everybody together and is the arbiter of last decisions to do their job, that we're even having this discussion.
Yeah, it did seem to me there was a slight disconnect between Clare and Paul's idea of what fans are thinking and to our idea of what fans are thinking. But again, I think that's something we should explore with Kevin Miles, Lisa and Andy. Just on the parachute payment thing, Kieran, because I did a lot of research for this interview, and I went through the government website in some detail and what they're saying about what the regulator would and won't do. I'm still not entirely sure what the regulator would do about parachute payments.
Well, it would appear that the regulator would be able to make a decision around parachute payments if a decision is not made between the Premier League and the EFL. My personal view is that if you have a parachute payments decision made independently of an overall financial settlement, that would be incredibly short-sighted. And I would, in those cases, I would share the Premier League's concerns, because if you are promoted to the Premier League, you have to be able to offer 3, 4, 5 year contracts. So therefore, the threat of taking parachute payments away, as Paul said, has now been that's no longer on the table. But I think you have to give some form of longer term commitment than we might change our mind in 12 months.
Yeah. Don't forget, you can now join our Price of Football Club. We'll get ad-free listening, bonus episodes and more. Just go to priceoffootball.com and click on Join the Club to sign up today. One important thing to be aware of, if you're one of our wonderful Patreon subscribers, your membership will not transfer over automatically if you sign up to the new club. You'll need to cancel your Patreon subscription and set up a new one using the link on the website. We'll turn off our Patreon offering at the end of this month. If you have a question you'd like answered on the show, email us at questions@priceoffootball.com. Don't forget, you can follow us on Twitter X, and you can find us on YouTube. And if you'd like to find our book, if you'd like to buy our book even, you can find it. You can find it in Oxfam, probably, I imagine. But if you'd like to buy it, you can find details on our website, priceoffootball.com.
The Price of Football. The Price of Football.